This is JadeCast, your gateway to traditional martial arts and Chinese culture. Brought to you by your host, Chef Jonathan Bluestein. Hello everyone and welcome back to JadeCast. Today I'd like to raise and discuss with you a very controversial topic, which is victim accountability. Now hear me out. Over the past few years, there had been a lot of social uproar with respect to what is called victim shaming. I am personally of the opinion that no victim of a sexual or violent assault or any other form of assault ought to be shamed for what they underwent or suffered. This is uncalled for and generally should not be tolerated in our society. That being said, in the world there is a law of attraction, and unfortunately, sadly, there is a certain involvement of victims in the crimes perpetrated against them. It does not mean it is the victim's fault. It does not mean that the victim ought to be blamed or ashamed. However, as a martial arts teacher who has taught many people and a lot of self-defense classes, especially for women, I often tell people that they have a certain responsibility and accountability for preventing themselves from becoming a magnet for various criminals. And today I'd like to speak about that. What listeners ought to know about criminals is that they are akin to sharks or businessmen. Oftentimes, in many respects, they are sorts of businessmen, just operating illegally. So, being sharks or businessmen, what do they look for? And it doesn't matter if we're talking about money offenders or people involved in sexual or physical assaults. All criminals share the trait of looking for an easy target, all right? And imagine them as if they were sharks patrolling the oceans. You may have noticed that it is most unusual for a shark to attack a blue whale. A blue whale is just a humongous creature. It's too much work. The shark would go for the smaller target, preferably for a target which bleeds, meaning that it is weak. It is an easier target. Same as business, right? Typically, an astute businessman would usually not go for the difficult deals, for something that might only yield significant profit in 5 or 10 or 20 years. People prefer to go for the easier things, the least effort producing the most result, right? So all criminals and all successful businessmen work with accordance to that modality. And speaking of criminals, they have a sort of an unconscious understanding of what makes for an easier target. Sometimes they actually can quantify and qualify who would be the easier victim for them, but often they just see it. Same as a shark would smell a drop of blood in the ocean. Now, it is often correctly stated by martial arts teachers that once someone has picked up martial arts practice, within a few weeks to a few months, typically they become less of a target. If they were bullied before, they might not be bullied as much. If they would have been looked at funny by some criminals on the street, it wouldn't be as common later. Even without any need to use the martial arts against anyone in particular. But what is seldom discussed is how this process works in real life. What is it about martial arts practice that actually makes those people, be they women or men, more immune, relatively speaking, to a criminal offense? What is it about what changes in their bodies and minds that makes them for a more difficult target and projects that sort of image so that the criminals could actually pick up on it without even speaking with them. These are some of the things I'd like to touch upon today. Before my eyes right now is a study called Attracting Assault: Victims' Nonverbal Cues by Betty Grayson and Maurice I. Stein. This study titled Attracting Assault: Victims' Nonverbal Cues. I don't have the exact year it is from. I gather it must be from the 1990s. And the first paragraph postulates potential victims may be signaling their vulnerability to would-be assailants through gestures, posture, and exaggerated movements. What an interesting supposition. And again, this was a research done, I think, in the 1990s. And those researchers sought to find out what is it exactly about the non-verbal cues given off by certain people that attract criminals. I think that's a very good question. Those researchers had a very interesting modality which they developed to find this out. So what they did was as follows. They put a camera on the streets of New York City that filmed people passing by on a certain street where assaults were taking place often. The camera filmed people between the hours of 10 a.m. and 12 noon every day, and they took videos of a few dozen people for which you could clearly see their body language, and you could see them strolling for a few dozen meters. And then they took those videos of a few dozen people and they showed them one by one to a few dozen inmates in various prisons who were convicted of assaults of people whom they did not know. The few dozen inmates trying to grade the few dozen people who were randomly filmed on a New York City street had to give them a rating of 1 to 10. 1 was a very easy ripoff, meaning that if an inmate gave that person filmed on the street a rating of 1, that means it's an easy prey. It's someone they would definitely go after if they're there on the street trying to rob them or assault them or whatever. And a 10 would avoid it. Too big a situation, too heavy. So the grading went as from 1 to 10, a very easy ripoff. 2, an easy dude to corner. 3, you could take that one out. 4, looks like a fairly easy hit. 5, you could stand the problem. 6, could give you a little static. 7, would be a problem, could give you a hard time. 8, hard dude to knock off. Wouldn't mess with him. 9, would be heavy, would give you a hard time. And a 10 is a total non-victim, would avoid it, too big a situation, too heavy. So first, the researchers had the inmates give those ratings to all of the people who were filmed. Then following that, they segmented the different people who were filmed to different age groups. And of those people who already had gradings of how easy a victim they could potentially be in the eyes of actual real inmates, they tried to analyze their nonverbal cues or body language based on 21 different parameters, such as how much energy they had, whether they kept that energy inside their bodies or they let that energy open up and sprawl out. Did they have short strides, medium strides, or long strides? Did they walk straight or walk diagonally, etc., etc.? And based on these nonverbal cues or body language, the researchers tried to understand why the inmates had given those people certain gradings of victimhood. Naturally, as expected, the older people who were filmed, older defined as being older than 40 years old, an estimation of course, and these people were filmed without their knowledge, these people were taken to be on average an easier target in the eyes of the inmates relative to the younger people, younger defined as estimated to be 35 years old and younger. That was to be expected, of course. But there are some interesting conclusions with respect to the body language, and I would like to quote to you from the study itself. And I'm quoting. The typical victim, as perceived by the criminal respondents in this study, would have either a long or a short stride, but not a medium stride. This is not a matter of specifically measured length in feet and inches, but rather is expressed in terms of bodily dimensions and how the leg moves comfortably from the hip joint when the weight is shifted and the leg is extended. Thus, a long stride for a person who is 5 feet tall might be a short stride for someone who is 6 feet tall. This typical victim would probably move his or her body so that the body weight would shift laterally, diagonally, or with an up-down movement. He or she would tend to walk gesturally rather than posturally. In terms of whole body movement, the typical victim would move unilaterally, one side at a time, rather than contralaterally, moving the left arm and the right leg and then the right arm and the left leg. Finally, the victim would tend to lift his or her feet while walking rather than using a more fluid swing movement. So, these are very interesting observations from the study, and I would like to break them down. The first thing noticed by the researchers is that the would-be victims had exaggerated strides. They either had too big of a stride or too small of a stride. This means, in the subconscious or possibly conscious mind of the criminal, that the would-be victim, the easier victim, is someone without a refined control of his gait, his or her gait. These were both men and women. The second very interesting thing is that the would-be victims in the eyes of the felons were people who were moving in an awkward fashion in that they were kind of striding like a robot, left side, right side, left side, right side, rather than forming an energetic X pattern, moving their left leg with their right hand and their left hand with their right leg as a healthy, I wouldn't say normal, but a healthy gait would look in a human being, right? And there's also an interesting comment about how those people were using too much energy, basically trying to raise their legs in order to step, rather than using the inertia of their walking movements to power the next stride with the last step and their own body weight. Now, what does that mean in the eyes of a criminal? Essentially, what the criminals could see here, that these people are uncoordinated, that they are weaker, that their nervous system, their muscles, their tendons, their bones are not operating smoothly and fluently. And this thing, my friends, is exactly what the martial arts provide people. The postural stability, the improved gait, and the superior coordination that people achieve with martial arts training within a few weeks to a few months even, is exactly the sort of thing that would change their non-verbal cues or body language when walking on the street and would make them for less of a target in the eyes of potential assailants. And indeed, the researchers note, and I'm quoting here, the picture drawn of a typical non-victim, that means someone whom the criminals would not have attacked. The picture drawn of such a person is completely different. The typical non-victim would use a medium stride, shift weight in a three-dimensional pattern, and they put in brackets as if he or she were executing a figure eight, walk posturally, meaning be erect, move contralaterally, meaning that they move their right leg with their left hand and right hand with their left leg, and swing his or her feet, meaning that they were able to use the inertia and momentum of their own shifting body weight in the previous stride to power their gait. In summary of those observations, the researchers have written the following. The prime difference between perceived victim and non-victim groups, therefore, seems to revolve around the wholeness or consistency of movement. Non-victims have an organized quality about their body movements, and they function comfortably within the context of their own bodies. In contrast, the gestural movement of victims seems to communicate inconsistency and dissonance. To put it differently, the researchers summarize: the perceived victims are non-synchronous or anti-synchronous within themselves. Instead of body parts working to complement each other, as in a contralateral walk, that is a normal walk, the potential victim's body parts seem to move against each other, as in the non-fluidity of a unilateral body movement, or the lifting rather than graceful swinging of the feet. What does it all tell us about victim accountability? Well, we typically speak of don't walk in a dark alley late at night in a crime-ridden neighborhood, right? Or don't talk the wrong way to certain people because that might get them upset. We all have our individual freedoms, but some things are just not wise to do. But we seldom speak of the right body language. And here we see truly scientific research which has examined how body language affects the way one is perceived by criminals and how it affects the way that one might become a victim of a criminal assault. And we do see that body language and non-verbal cues are very important. And we see also the connection that martial arts have with becoming more, relatively speaking, more immune to potential assault due to improved coordination and the manner in which we walk and coordinate our bodies. Thus, without entering the realm of victim shaming, we can confidently speak of victim accountability and teach others how our personality and the manner in which we manage ourselves and our bodies can affect our future, our karma, and the way that other people perceive us, for good and bad, whether with respect to potential criminal assaults, business, romantic relationships, or otherwise. Well, that is it for today, folks. Wherein you enjoyed this short lecture. Be sure to look for my best-selling titles, Research of Martial Arts or The Martial Arts Teacher 2. That's the second edition. Go on your local Amazon website, whether it be amazon.com or amazon.co.uk or any of those other Amazons, and type in Research of Martial Arts or The Martial Arts Teacher 2. And you would find my best-selling titles and others full of fascinating discussions about martial arts, self-defense, traditional Chinese culture, and much, much more. See you around next time.